Order, and welcome to this oral evidence session of the Work and Pension Select Committee and the final session for our inquiry into employment support for disabled people. And it's a pleasure to welcome our first panel. We have David Lillicrap from the West London Alliance. And David, you're going to explain a little bit more in a moment about that group. And then online we have Ruth Cooper, who's the chair of the Local Authorities Economic Development Group, but also from Renfrewshire Council. Very nice to see you, albeit virtually, Ruth. I'm going to start with questions, if that's okay. And my first one to you, David. So tell us about the West London Alliance and who you're made up from when you started. Just give us a feel of the Connect to Work programme as part of that group.
So West London Alliance is the oldest of the sub-regional partnerships in London. I think it started about 25 years ago. The core membership is Barnet, Brent, Harrow, Hammersmith and Fulham, Hillingdon, Hounslow and Ealing. Though more recently, with the move of employment support to being very much health-focused and disability-focused, we also work across the 12 of the 13 boroughs that are covered by the soon-to-be-merged North West London and North Central London ICB. So in terms of how Connect to Work fits into that, I think that maturity of the system in West London means that we have a lot of the established processes and governance that Connect to Work could slot into. For example, we've been running work and health programme on a devolved basis since 2018. So I have a programme board for that Connect to Work slotted straight into. And in terms of the decision-making processes around Connect to Work, we already have pre-existing Chief Executive Officer groups and Directors of Economy groups that we could take decisions relating to Connect to Work through.
That sounds like so. So you've been a long-running group, you know each other, your governance framework's already there. So how was it in terms of integrating Connect to Work within this group? You said it was easy. Were there any challenges that you found?
There are always challenges. I think where I'm saying is we had an advantage over maybe some other accountable bodies in that we had a framework into which Connect to Work could slot. In terms of, I can't think of any specific difficulties. I mean, certainly with the local authorities, there's a huge challenge with integrating on the ICB side because, as you heard in the last session, Connect to Work is based on individual placement support and SEQF. And with individual placement support, one of the key factors for achieving high fidelity is integration into health services. And that's very much newer. And so that's been a big challenge in terms of both go live and subsequent rollout. And it will be a key focus for my team for the remainder of Connect to Work.
So how did that manifest? So you say that the protocols around that, integrating it into the integrated care board, weren't there?
We've been working with the integrated care board for some time, but it's an evolving relationship. I think when there was the vaccine programme for COVID, because we were working with a lot of unemployed people and they needed a lot of people to employ to deliver the vaccine programme, we actually formed quite a good symbiotic relationship there in terms of we could help them out and we had the resource that they needed, which is people looking for work.
Okay, I think we might want to explore that a little bit later on. But I'm going to move to Ruth now, if that's okay. Ruth, tell us about what's going on with Connect to Work in your part of the world.
So Connect to Work is not available in Scotland at the moment, as far as I'm aware.
Ignore me, Ruth. I had a senior moment there. So in terms,
I'll tell you about
No
One Left Behind.
What do you mean, senior moment? Okay, so no one left behind. Apologies.
Sure. So no, not at all. So No One Left Behind is the Scottish approach to delivering employability services. It focuses on providing person-centred, flexible approach to people of all ages, and the main aim is to bring people much closer to work and to get people into work. It's a joint approach, so it's joint between local government, the local authorities and Scottish Government, and we signed a partnership agreement back in 2019 to work together and to invest jointly in employability services across Scotland. And the local authorities have a long history of prioritising employability. We used to use a lot of EU structural funds, and Scottish Government, who also invested, but really wanted to change their approach from national programmes to bringing things to a much more local level, with the key aim, I think, really of reducing duplication, integrating and aligning employability support with other key services such as health and housing and justice, and making sure it was local decision making about how resources were used. So really in Scotland, No One Left Behind is very much about the local decision making process. And in every area in Scotland now we have what's called the local employability partnerships, which are usually chaired by the local authority. I'm the chair in the Renfrewshire area, and also involve the third sector, DWP job centres. We have Skills Development Scotland, further in higher education, the private sector through the Chambers of Commerce. And we make decisions as a group about how resources are spent and what the local priorities are, really to make sure, again, that we're not duplicating and that we are making sure that the funding and the services are going to where the biggest areas or priorities would be, and so that we're not duplicating what's already on the ground, because in some areas there are a lot of provisions through the third sector, and we don't want to remove them or take away from them, but to build on what we already need. And No One Left Behind is very much about support for disadvantaged groups, one of which would be those with long-term health conditions or disabilities. But it also includes people maybe with convictions who've gone through the justice system, maybe those from very deprived areas or families living in poverty, young people particularly care experienced. So the services that we have are there for all disadvantaged people, and then we would, with resources that we've got, we would then augment them with specialist services for particular groups within the area, and one of them obviously would be people with health and disability issues.
So in terms of, for example, a cohort of people who may have mental health issues, then that's identified as they present. Is there do you have a triage system like others, and yes, then they're signposted to the?
Yeah, we do. So how it works, if I can give you, I think the key thing in Scotland is probably none of the LEPs and the services are exactly the same, but they follow a similar process. And if I talk you through our process, so my service deals with just under 2,000 people in a year, and they would come through to our own service, which has got all the key workers. Okay. And so my own service, I'll just be open about figures and things as well. So my service, including the funding that we get, is worth about £5 million a year. About 3 million of it goes to a core service, which I deliver, which has got key workers, trainers, welfare rights officers. It's got health and wellbeing support, and it's I would say more of a not quite generic service, but it's a service for anyone, because what we find is that although we have people with very specific disability needs, a lot of people who see themselves as more mainstream also have, in particular, mental health support issues. So we have a range of core services, that cover the full employability pipeline, as we would call it. But then what we do is we have another £1 million of additional bought-in support for the Renfrewshire area, where the LEP would decide what is actually required. And that's where we buy in IPS or supported employment, etc. And then we've about another £1 million of support that's all about the clients themselves, so that we can buy training for them on an ad hoc basis, so that we can fund training or equipment for work. We also have quite a big programme of paid work experience where they can undertake up to 6 months in work, which is fully paid for. So there's a range of things there. So you kind of go through a pipeline with one key worker who's really supporting you and is making sure that you're going to the next bit of the service that suits you. They'll help with that kind of assessment and support, and there's an action plan. And we've a wide range of activities that are available locally for that person to work through.
Thank you, Ruth. Just a very quick one from me, because I'm conscious of time. Do you have opportunities to chat across the border, David, Ruth, to learn from each other?
No. Don't know how.
Well, there you go. You're introduced now. You can.
Ruth.
All right. Thank you very much. Damien Egan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, David and Ruth. I'd like to ask you both how much choice you had in how you deliver your respective programmes, and I guess also how you have learned and adapt what works best. I'm conscious you both cover large areas, and even the West London Alliance, I was involved with Central London Forward, and so these regional partnerships have vastly different communities and different needs. How do you accommodate that and learn what's working?
Originally this was around Connect to Work, but in West London we run Workwell, and we're also running an MSK Trailblazer, one of the inactivity trailblazers that we are focusing on musculoskeletal conditions. So on Connect to Work, we're asked to deliver IPS and SEQF, and these are both quite tightly defined within those two frameworks, and they both have very good evidence bases. So there's limited things we can do in terms of the approach, though given the evidence base around both of them, I don't think for us that's not an issue. We'd rather work with something that has an evidence of that it works. On MSK Trailblazer, the clue is in the Trailblazer name. We could do, we could do whatever we wanted effectively. Obviously, we had to make the case through the business case process that that it was. We thought it was going to work, but it's intended to trial new things. And Workwell probably falls between the two, in that there was a degree of requirements laid down by the joint DWP-DHSC team, but within that we could work more broadly. In terms of the reason why we are very sort of supportive of devolution is that we can do things. We do understand the local environment better than somebody, say, based in Leeds or Birmingham. We have, and this is a London thing, as you say, with Central London Forward, we have very diverse communities. Again, we know that we have the largest Gurdwara outside of India in Southall. We've got a long relationship and growing with NHS colleagues. So these are the things that we can bring as additionality over and above, say on Connect to Work, a quite tightly defined specification for how we deliver employment support.
Thank you, David. And Ruth, is there anything you'd like to add on that?
Yes, so I think at the local level we've got full responsibility for deciding where the funding goes and what we need at a local level. Although we get funding from Scottish Government, they leave the decision making to the local partners. And as part of our LEP structure, we have thematic groups. So one of them would be for those with health and disability issues. And the thematic group has got both employability practitioners, but also people from those services related to health and disability, so that they can tell us where they're experiencing concerns at the operational level, and we can link them with the employability requirements. So for a lot of it, I think, as David was saying as well, we're quite experienced in working together. Our LEP's been operational probably for about 14 years now, but really since the start of No One Left Behind in 2019, it changed to be just information to be actual decision making. So it's made quite a big difference, I think, in how the LEP operates. And I think one of the key things for us in having that thematic group is that we're also then aware of other resources that might come in for health and disability via health or via the council services through social work and adult services. So it lets us all be up to date with what is going on within the local area. We're a much smaller area than David had mentioned. Renfrewshire has about 190,000 residents, so quite a small number compared to David's size in London. So the decision making for us is very localised. It can even be down to community-based level, not just the whole of Renfrewshire, but particular community focus as well. So it seems to work relatively well. Of course, resources are always an issue and we could always use more. But I think in terms of decision making, we have a very good understanding and awareness of what's already on the ground and what we need to do to improve the situation.
Ruth, thank you. These kind of programmes, the outcomes can vary significantly between different localities. Do you feel the programmes you're talking about strike the right balance between having that local flexibility but also the national oversight in terms of making sure the outcomes are where everyone wants them to be?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Ruth?
Yeah, I think so. In Scotland, it's probably slightly different. If you were to look at the No One Left Behind figures in Scotland that are published through the Scottish Government, you would see figures that only represent the Scottish Government's financial input to No One Left Behind. And that at the moment is about half of the figures. So I would say that what probably isn't there is the full figures of what's delivered across Scotland, because individual local authorities may report to their own local authority, but that isn't actually sort of pulled together at a national level. So the figures that you'll see in Scotland don't represent the full picture, I would say.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. John Bell.
Thank you, Chair. There's a terrific variety of services across the country, and the idea is to give freedom to allow local delivery, but then there's also the national programme. So how well do you think that the national programmes integrate with local services? Ruth, you were talking earlier about how you didn't want to conflict with or cancel out a service that was already there. So how do you think the integration is going?
Yeah, so I think in our area, because a number of the DWP services, such as Connect to Work, aren't operational because of the devolved nature of employability in Scotland, it's not maybe as big an issue, but what we have within Scotland across the board is the DWP national services without a lot of the programmes. But also we have Skills Development Scotland, who are the national careers body for Scotland, who work primarily with young people, but can do all ages well. So I think because a lot of the responsibility for the creation and design and development of those specialist programmes now sits at the local level, then the partners are round the table with their own knowledge and awareness and understanding of how their services work, and with the ability for us then at that local level to be able to create the services that merge around that. So for us, I think it works relatively well. What we feel we don't have now is some big programmes getting parachuted in to areas where there were already those services there in different ways. So I think for us, it's been an improvement in service since 2019, and that's not just in DWP services, but also Scottish Government previously would announce large national services, and we would be thinking at the local level that's already that's just going to compete with what's already on the ground and working well. So for us, this new model, new 6 years or so, but this model works well for us now in terms of being able to prioritise the groups that we want and to have the services that we're looking at locally.
Thank you. And David, in London, integration of local, national, how?
There aren't, aside from Restart, I'm not aware that there are many nationally run employment support programmes remaining that Connect to Work being devolved, Workwell coming into each of the ICBs. But what we've established is a triage function, because an observation is that the first thing that happens when somebody sends to us an expression of interest in having employment support, the first thing that would happen in any programme is a support worker would pick up the phone and call them. At that point, it's only an expression of interest as something of a sales job to be done. Once somebody has shown an interest in going back into employment in general, we want to be very much on the front foot to promote and to get them into the programme so we can start helping them. So they would typically take an hour. Now, we get 2,000 expressions of interest a month. So what we've done is we've extracted that into a triage process, which looks at whether it is most suitable for somebody to go on to Workwell, Connect to Work, Trailblazer. But then in addition, we also run, centrally funded by OHID, an IPS service for people in treatment for drug and alcohol addiction. We've worked for a long time with our IPS teams in secondary mental health that are either run by the trusts or are outsourced by the trusts. So where we get people who have severe and enduring mental illness, we can move them onto there. But what it means is that the individual gets a seamless view of all employment support. We also have a very, very good relationship with our local JCP, and the head of West London's Job Centre Plus, she sits on our programme board, and that's how we sort of integrate, say, the work of the disability employment advisors.
Thank you. And in any programme like this, the cooperation with local employers is absolutely crucial to success. And I know in my own constituency in Horsham, many of them have disengaged with the local job centre because they felt they were getting the wrong sort of candidate put in front of them. Mm-hmm. How well do you think, how well engaged do you think employers have been in your areas? Ruth, if I could start with you first.
Sure. So as part of our service, we have an employer engagement team that works for all disadvantaged groups in the area in terms of getting them in front of employers and trying to secure vacancies, particularly for some of those people. So I think it's a mixed bag. And we in the current year, we commissioned another organisation, SUS, the Scottish Union of Supported Employment, to work more with employers to make them aware of supports available to them for people with disability, because we felt as if we just weren't really getting the penetration of employers understanding what was available to them to support. So we recognised that as a weakness in the area. Because we're local, we have good links with some employers, and I think probably the smaller employers who have much more flexibility about how they recruit are more prepared to take a chance on a local person because we've introduced them and they've maybe had a work trial, etc. with them, or there's a particular passion there. So I think it's quite a mixed bag. It's quite hard, I think, to get some of the larger employers in particular to step out of their comfort zone of what they usually do. But in other ways as well, we have IPS support that works really well, but it's very individually targeted on, the right job for the right person, so the right employer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot more that could be done in the employer engagement arena. But the numbers that we're looking at just now, we're relatively happy with how things are going.
Thank you. And David?
So Shore Trust run an employer engagement function for us. But if you go back to how I described with the triage, because we brought most of the provision together, we don't have this different services competing for the attention of the employer. So we're not getting 7 different programs all knocking on the door of an employer. And again, an advantage of the working across the West London lines is that, sorry, I don't know all of your backgrounds, clearly some of you from London, your borough is frequently not the place where you work, and especially if you live near the border and you're working in a school just on the other side. So again, if we were to run them as individual programs within the individual boroughs, there would be quite a lot of cases where 3 or 4 different boroughs would be knocking on the door of the same employer. And again, we have so our employer engagement, we always want it to be better. But, it's never going. It's a long way from being perfect. But we have Heathrow, which represents 10% of all jobs in West London. We found this out during the pandemic, because that went fairly seriously wrong in West London on an employment basis. And also we have the largest industrial estate in Europe in Park Royal. And so we have good relationships into both of those. But it's a case of just constantly working on it. And I think one thing that we've done, which employers have really appreciated, is we run events called Interviews into Work. Now, this came from an idea from one of my team who sort of observed that job fairs, very few people left with jobs. They often left with a plastic pencil or something, some other such like. So on a regular basis, we work with employers where they're looking to recruit fairly large numbers of jobs, such as, so we have Metroline and one of the London bus companies are one of the employers we work very closely with, and they provide us with a committed number of jobs. They trust us to pre-screen candidates, and then typically 100 to 150 job seekers will come into an interview into work event where there is a guaranteed job. That's not to say they will get it, but as soon as but in general, around about 70 to 80% of people who attend these events get a job. So that's sort of just one thing that we do that really shows that with some employers we do have a very good relationship, but I'm never going, we are constantly looking for more employers, and the employers we do work with to be more accepting, particularly now. Work and Health Programme was less focused on long-term conditions and disability. So now everyone who's coming in is likely to need help from access to work and or some adaptation when they come in, which is not a new challenge, but it's more of a focus now.
Thank you. Last quick question. Where do most of your referrals come from? From job centres or somewhere else? We're
currently working on a rather nice infographic, which I can't show you today, which shows in October 2024, when we launched Workwell, we probably were 95% reliant on Job Centre Plus, and we're reducing that reliance. I think they've been a godsend for us, but we're now approaching 20 or 30% coming from non-JCP referral routes. A lot of that is NHS, which is good. This is really where we want to, let's say, going back to the IPS Fidelity, you can't really achieve fidelity without integration with your local providers. So in terms of, yes, the ICB is the sort of top layer, but we now tend to work more with the providers, so the individual hospital trusts and PCNs and individual GP surgeries.
Thank you, very interesting. Ruth, same question?
So probably I would say in our area about less than a third of referrals would come through the job centre, and the rest is by word of mouth or through wider partners working with clients, whether it's in housing or health or social work, etc. So because we advertise locally as the employability service for any resident, any age, etc., then we tend to be one of the first ports of call for people to come in if they require additional support. So, and from that, we would then assess their disability need, etc., and then put them on to the pathway that's right for them. So we've got a really good local presence and awareness locally of people of we're a supportive service here to help them.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you both for joining us this morning. So we've heard of workforce shortages in the employability support sector. Just firstly to David, in respect of Connect to Work, have you been able to secure the necessary expertise that you require, and how are you managing workforce pressures as demand for support grows?
So there are quite a few bits in that. Again, we came from a very strong position on this. We've been running IPS in primary care as a pilot for about 5 years. So we have locally, through Shaw Trust and Twining Hestia, they are both have achieved IPS fidelity on other programmes. The nature of IPS fidelity is that it needs to be done per programme. So even though we ran a service that was outsourced to Shaw Trust, and we now outsource to Shaw Trust for Connect to Work, we have to sort of re-establish the fact that that is delivered at a high degree of fidelity to the IPS model. So we came into this again in a position of having an established IPS workforce, and as IPSPC caseloads have declined, the individuals who are good enough have been moved across into Connect to Work. Also, something we do with Shaw Trust is we've been using IPSPC as a sort of a feeder, a training IPS program where people who have got experience of delivering employment support can develop their skills on an established IPS program. Having said that, we did have some recruitment issues over the summer because with IPS you can't bring somebody in and get them delivering IPS on day one of employment. So if you look into the statistics of our referrals, we had to, one of our absolute red lines is we don't want to go over caseload sizes. So there's a fundamental that if you have a caseload size of 18 and you have 100 IPS coaches, you can't, even that simple one, I'm going to struggle. Well, you can't take on more than 1,800 people. So we did have a bit of a delay, but that's now resolved. In terms of competition for resource, the NHS runs IPS services, as I said earlier, in their secondary mental health services. And as part of our commission, we've equalised pay with the NHS pay grades. But yes, it is, it's an ongoing problem that people who work in West London on IPS, they will come in with having worked for an IPS service that's got a very good reputation, and they will be able to get jobs elsewhere, almost on the back of having worked in a very high-performing IPS service. So it's an ongoing problem, but we're not experiencing any issues at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And Ruth, by comparison, have you experienced any problems finding enough people with the right skills that you need to deliver the No One Left Behind programme?
Not particularly. I think because a lot of the programmes that are local are commissioned to expert services. So, we would put out our IPS, other than Project Search, which a lot of the time is delivered in-house across local authorities. The majority of those types of specialist services would be commissioned, and then we have, particularly from the third sector, sort of expert organisations who are very good at delivering, and we try not to get involved with, they're the experts, so we bring them in and we'll provide the generic and introductory support, and then they'll move on to those services. So we do find occasionally where we've got commissioned programmes and maybe, they have got a staffing issue, and but I think no more than anyone else, so I don't think it's been a particular issue for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Barron.
Yes, thanks. Just conscious of time, but wanted to just focus in on delivery against targets. So how many people are you expected to help into work, and how soon will you know if you're on track to meet that target?
So each programme has a different target. In terms of in Work and Health programme, the target or the break-even target set by Treasury was, I think, about 35% of people not getting a job but sustaining in work. And we have similar targets on Connect to Work. In terms of, at the moment, we're mainly tracking first earnings. We're ahead of profile on first earnings. We're ahead of profile, or we're at profile in terms of number of starts. So we're looking on Connect to Work. We are going to be working with around about 11,000 people over the duration of Connect to Work. In terms of knowing whether we're achieving it, Work and Health programme, our performance is published on Stat Explore by ONS, and I think the transparency of relative performance across areas is a really strong motivational factor in trying. We want to be the best, and we continue to drive on that. And I say again, this other key thing is we have less of an interest long term in job starts. We have much more of an interest in sustained jobs.
Okay. And Ruth, have you been able to deliver the outcomes that you've been expected to, and have you managed changing demands for your services?
Yeah, so uniquely maybe we set our own targets at a local level. The funding that we get from Scottish Government as part of our overall funding portfolio doesn't come with set targets, so it's quite different to how previous, like I was saying, national programmes would run, where there was an expectation. However, it doesn't mean that we're not actually hitting the previous targets. It's just that they're not set as such, and in that way. Similar to David, I think our numbers of completers with us, the outcome rate is really quite high, and we also look at the sustained job outcomes. I think at the local level, there's a real commitment for making sure that each year we're surpassing the year before, and I think one of the problems with the outcomes is it does look at direct things like numbers into work or sustained into work, whereas I think when you're delivering quite wide-ranging employability services, you're also looking at the individual progress of the person, that there's softer indicators there that we also like to talk about, and for some of our people as well, because it's an integrated service, it could also be getting support into housing for the first time, and so there's a whole range of things rolled up in there. So we don't have targets, but I'm sure at the individual meetings that Scottish Government have with each of the partner agencies, the local authorities, if the performance wasn't there, they would be saying, come on. But I think certainly in our area, the performance is there, but it's very locally set.
Thank you. Amanda Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David and Ruth, for joining us. David, to you. Concerns have been raised about the possible gap provision following the end of work and health programme. As this programme was targeted at people closer to the labour market, is this the case, and is there a danger that Connect to Work will be redirected to meet this client group?
So I think where you're going with that is that on work and health programme, there was an observation that it typically took 3 to 6 months for somebody to go into work, whereas IPS has an expectation that people go into work much more rapidly than that. So there is a risk that somebody who feels they're not at the point of going into work in the next few weeks won't engage with Connect to Work because of that expectation, and they potentially then won't be served.
Thank you. Ruth, No One Left Behind builds on an earlier programme called First Start Scotland. Did the transition from one to another result in any gaps of provision there? Have you got any reflections on that?
I think it probably depends who you speak to about that. From the local authority perspective, we basically saw Fair Start as being a duplication of what was already on the ground, and it was the same client group for both. So before it was called No One Left Behind, we had very similar services running within local authorities. So for us, it was the opportunity to bolster those services then that worked well, and we didn't really see any particular difficulty in one phasing out and one becoming at a higher level because of resources being redeployed from one area to another. So probably not, but I think if you asked other providers of Fair Start Scotland, they might give you a different answer.
That's useful, thank you. And to both of you, if you could make one improvement to the effectiveness of these programmes, what would it be? David, did you want to start with that?
I'm not sure this is about effectiveness, but I think we could do with some more caseload. As I mentioned, we get 2,000 expression of interest a month, and at present we can take in about 600 new starts, which means at about now we're getting to a slightly difficult position in that we've used up all of our contracted caseload for the year. From the 1st of April, we go back to being able to welcome 800 a month. But we've had to be a bit creative with our provider and diverting people, because once somebody says, I'm interested, our programs are entirely voluntary. If somebody who is not in work wants to work, I think it does feel rather bad to say, well, we can't really help you right now, we've run out of money.
So this is almost as if it's like peak and flow and how you would manage that in a different way. So overall, volumes, does it work over a 12-month period, or are you just simply running out as we get to the end?
Run out as we get to the end.
Okay,
but,
that's useful.
So we negotiated some social value investment from Shore Trust, and they're using that to help plug the gap.
It's been more successful than we expected, or
in terms of people starting on programme.
Lovely, thank you. Well, that should be good news.
Indeed, nice note to end on.
Well, I didn't know if Ruth had any.
Sorry,
Apologies, Chair. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think for me, maybe two things to mention. One is in Scotland, everything's down to annual funding, which is really difficult in terms of commissioning longer term services. And we do it quite well. I think there's always an expectation that funding will be there, but it's quite a difficulty for long-term planning, and just getting those programmes that run over calendars or financial years is difficult. But the one thing I would really like to see, and it's not just about health and disability, it's really about, I think there's a really strong message at a national level around the benefits of work, and I don't think that comes through. And I would love to see a kind of public service campaign and advertising, marketing generally about how positive work can be. And I think that's one of the things that when we get feedback from clients, they are different people, whether they've had a health or disability issue, or whether they've just been in poverty for a long time and disadvantaged, or they've been care experience, they've not worked. the difference it makes to your health and well-being by working in good work is amazing. And there's a real misinformation around how benefits can support that transition into work, and that actually by starting work doesn't mean that you lose all of your benefits. You know, I know it's very individual in some cases, but I would really like to see something that really promotes the benefit of work and that work is good for you, because I think that would make a big difference to people who are entrenched and not working and don't really see that bigger picture.
Yep. Thank you, Ruth. That was also a nice
It's also a very good one to
end.
end on. Thank you so much. Thank you both of you, Ruth Cooper, David Lillicrap. Lovely to see you both. Thank you. Order. Order, and welcome to our second panel for our final session of our inquiry into employment support for disabled people. And it's a particular pleasure to welcome the Minister for Employment, the Right Honourable Dame Diana Johnson, and her team. And we have Lorraine Jackson, who's from the Department for Health and Social Care as part of the Joint Work and Health Directorate, Dr. Simon Marlow, from the DWP, but also from the Joint Work and Health Directorate, and Angus Gray, who's the Director responsible for the Pathways to Work, Connect to Work, Localism and Employment Support. I bet that keeps you busy, Angus. I'm going to start, if that's okay. We'll have some questions for you. So, Minister, you will know that this committee has spent a long time focusing on something that's really important to us, and that is around safeguarding the claimants, anybody who is engaged in accessing services through the department. So we wondered if we could start by considering what the position is now around conditionality and where it will be. Appreciate that Tim's review is underway, but thinking about conditionality for disabled people, where are we?
Well, first of all, I think I should say that I'm really pleased that this committee and the predecessor committee actually looked at safeguarding and took that very seriously. And I think one of the things I've been quite taken aback about since I became the minister at the end of last year is that previous governments didn't think that safeguarding was an issue that they needed to be concerned about. And I was quite shocked by that. And I think things have moved on considerably. Under this government, we are very clear that safeguarding is everybody's business. And I want to sort of pay tribute as well to the safeguarding lead in the DWP, our Chief Medical Advisor, Dr. Gail Allsop, because she's been spearheading that approach that this needs to be everybody's business. So on that basis, what's important is that Dr. Allsop and her team are very much embedded in policy development, and I think that's really very important. I've certainly made it my business to find out what's actually happening at the front line, because I have responsibility for job centres. So you will know, because you're all very experienced in this, that our frontline work coaches, they have vulnerability training as part of their initial training to be work coaches. And you will all appreciate that is different from safeguarding training. And what we did in the written ministerial statement at the end of last year that the Secretary of State put out was we made it clear that we are rolling out that level 1 safeguarding training. And I know that you, as the chair of the committee, wrote to the Permanent Secretary recently after his appearance to ask for further details about that level 1 safeguarding training. So, and I'm sure the Permanent Secretary will respond to you shortly on that. What I'm really pleased to say, though, is in terms of the clinical staff that are employed by the DWP, I know, and I've had this from Dr. Allsop, 100% of the clinical staff have had that safeguarding training to level 3. So that, I think, is very positive. She also told me that in terms of our contractors that we use in the DWP, we hover around 80% in terms of the training at level 3 because of the churn and the turnover of those individuals. But I'm certainly very focused on making sure that we have our frontline staff trained in, obviously, vulnerabilities, but in safeguarding as well. And in the written ministerial statement, we said at the end of this year we would take stock of where we've got to with that rolling out of the training, and we would come forward then with what our plans are for the remaining 4 years. As you know, it was a 5-year plan that was set out in the written ministerial statement.
Thank you. So does that mean at the moment that you haven't determined whether you are the form of conditionality for disabled people?
What I would say to you is that the discussions are very much with Dr. Gail Allsop and her team, part of any policy decisions that are going to be made. But I can't today say to you we have made decisions on that.
Moving on to the very encouraging, you might have heard some of the evidence from the previous panel, and the committee went on a visit to Durham to hear from Connect to Work providers and commissioners, and very encouraging, I have to say, in terms of the result there. But again, on the conditionality, or rather, sorry, on the safeguarding aspect of policy development, this new policy programme, what considerations around safeguarding did you make? What was Dr. Allsop's engagement in considering, for example, safeguarding in relation to contractor contracts?
Well, it might be helpful if I pass over to Angus at this point, because I came into this role in September, so I wasn't around when the original policy discussions were being held. But perhaps, Angus, you might be able to help us with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of layers to it. So I think, as you probably will have heard when you've been exploring with the deliverers of Connect to Work, there's it's an entirely voluntary programme. That's top line. Second is that there's some quite extensive stuff in the guidance about both eligibility but also suitability, so making sure that we are clear about the types of people we're trying to help, and key to that is it's someone who, yes, is struggling in the labour market, but somebody who is keen to engage and get work. That's one of they won't get the success out of Connect to Work unless they're in that category. So we've, in policy design terms, and we had a group of an expert reference group that we used of academics and deliverers and local authority representatives to help us design it in the first place. We were thinking, well, yeah, who is it that we need to help? How should we go about that? What's the evidence of what's effective? So that's one level. We then have in the process of approving delivery plans from the local areas being, there's one particular aspect of safeguarding, and I know it's just one slice of it, but the MAPA arrangements, which we've been very strong on. We want to make sure that there are clear processes and procedures in place from the delivery bodies, and that's one of the things we've been assessing to make sure their plan is good enough to approve that they have the right trained people, they know they're part of that local network and so on, to make sure that that particular group of people are not a risk to wider participants, and they handle them appropriately. And then more generally, it is just part of our expectations that it's more in that wider vulnerability space, but that providers set themselves up to be able to understand the needs of the people in front of them, to be empathetic to it, to really take account of reasonable adjustments and so on that people might need. And I think the key feature of the Connect to Work design is a thing called vocational profiling. So it's really about what are you looking for in work, how can we help you, and so on. And so making it really person driven, I think, is part of the answer.
As part of your governance framework, then you mentioned MAPA, and that has been part of the safeguarding approach that's used with local authorities. How do you ensure that it's meant to be there, but if it's not? So how are you then, as I say, within your governance arrangements?
I mean, it's been I think you may have heard from some of your witnesses that they're a bit grumpy with me about choose your verb, nitpicking, but some things, some nits need to be picked, and this is one of them. So it had to be both clearly identified and expressed in the delivery plan, and there's a sort of plausibility test. So it wasn't just, it looks like they've cut and pasted the right words from Google AI or whatever it was. So we've actually given many of them quite a hard time in conversation about, look, I have confidence you probably do this because you're a local authority and you deal with these issues daily, but you've given me nothing in the plan that gives me that confidence. So can you develop this story a bit better and demonstrate it? And then we'll be in the actual delivery, if there are any concerns raised, we'll clearly be exploring and investigating those. And we have, in general, we've let a contract for fidelity monitoring. So is the programme being delivered in line with the principles of supported employment? So that will be another key test of the delivery in practice.
Okay. Minister, just getting back, and I know your personal values, so clearly across the department, getting this embedded is absolutely essential. How within your sphere of influence are you ensuring that your teams have safeguarding absolutely embedded into what they do?
You're absolutely right. This is very important to me, and I think that safeguarding, particularly, that's about keeping people safe. And so recognising when someone who comes, say, to a job centre may be the victim of domestic abuse, or may have been trafficked, or may be being coerced in some way, it's absolutely, for me, important that that is picked up and acted on. So that's the safeguarding bit, and that's why, as I said at the outset, that's everybody's business. But clearly the vulnerability issue is also everybody's business, and I think we are further along in recognising vulnerabilities in the customers that we deal with in the job centres. So I think for me both are important. I think we've got much further to go on the safeguarding, but I am personally looking at that. I made it my business last night to go through and look at the level 1 training that we give to people to see what I thought about that. Now, I thought that was quite a good piece of training, and I want to make sure that that's rolled out and is advertised as far as it can be with our staff. We had in November last year the first safeguarding week in the DWP to really put some focus and emphasis on how important this is. So I hope that's going to be rolled out again this year. This year. But I think it's that constant messaging. And for me as a minister, asking questions. So when I go to job centres, I ask, have you done the job? Have you done this particular training? Do you feel confident to know what to do if someone presents to you and you are worried about them and you feel they may be a victim in some way?
Thank you so much. I'm now handing over to Amanda Hack.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for bringing you and your team to the panel today. So, Connect to Work is the government's employment support programme for disabled people, and it aims to support 300,000 people into work by the end of the 2029-30, with your estimate that about 50% will move into work. With the evaluation running through to 2031, how will you ensure early findings are available quickly enough to inform delivery and improve outcomes as we go through the programme's lifetime? Do you want to start?
Let me. I mean, as ever with employment programmes, there are a number of layers to this. So, I mean, the first thing, as you correctly point out, is we have these performance expectations. And in each grant agreement that I've signed with the local area, we've turned that into a performance curve. So when do we expect people to get their first earnings? When do we expect people to get sustained employment and numbers against that? So that will then be the basis of essentially performance management. I mean, it will be a more collaborative approach because we want to work with local authorities and not treat them just like a provider, if you like, because they are on the same team, but we have those very clear expectations that we'll be monitoring them against and then having conversations if they're off track. So that's your one's first indication of will we deliver our aspirations, is how is the actual performance going. And over the years, I think we've got, well, I mean, I've been here forever, but I suspect we were always quite good at it, but we're quite nuanced about, okay, that was a best guess about how many people might go in, what's actually going on, why are you slightly behind, or even sometimes in the early months, blimey, you're exceeding performance, are you sure you're still helping the right people? So we start with those conversations about context and understanding. And then, as you say, the real question becomes an impact question, which is where the evaluation comes in. So, Simon, do you want to say a bit about our approach to the evaluation?
Yes, to complement all the data that's coming in, starting to come in at the moment, over the sort of next year or two, we have a very comprehensive evaluation sort of plan. We've got contracted evaluation by NatSen, which will be looking at both all kinds of, it's a very mixed methods evaluation, qualitative evidence, quantitative surveys, and development of an impact study to look at what is the difference between the group that go on and the inferred counterfactual for the Connect to Work group. We're very keen. We've set out the business case assumptions for the impacts over the years. So that was published at the end of January, where for every £1 you might spend on Connect to Work, we estimate that overall the economic value will be around sort of £2. That's something we will be evaluating very closely. We've done this with all other programmes, such as whether it's Restart, whether it's Work Choice, whether it's New Deal for Disabled People. We'll be using very similar methodology. But of course, this is very different. It's richer in its locally driven. So we've got a lot of work to be able to develop this as a sort of team. So I don't know whether you wanted to add on anything more.
Is there any early findings that we're seeing? Because obviously, when we say disabled people, we're talking about a really broad range of individuals. And I'm always really interested that we do understand that nuance, that complexity, and how disabled people are managing their lives overall. So are we seeing any early findings, anything we're already tweaking?
Can I just say, first of all, though, it's disabled people and people with health conditions and complex reasons why they're not able to enter the labour market. And when I went down to Lewisham to see for myself what was going on, I was really privileged to meet a group of people who were part of Connect to Work. Really varied, actually. So a woman in her 50s who was struggling to get into work and perhaps had some personal issues. There was a young man who was a neurodivergent young man who was a brilliant swimming coach but needed some help to stay in work, and Connect to Work was able to assist him to do that job really well. And then an older man who'd had, I think he was telling me about his family, there'd been cancer, he'd had to care for family members, he'd been out of the labour market. He needed that bit of extra help to get him back in. So for me, that was really rich in seeing the variety of people who could be helped by Connect to Work. But sorry, I think, Angus, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, just to say, I mean, partly to reflect what we've already done. So Connect to Work itself builds on the the very snappily titled IPS PCE, so IPS in primary care. So in particular in implementation terms, we've learned a lot from that, and so been really stressing through the delivery planning process the importance of the integration with other services locally, for example, because that is one of the things we really see. We've also sort of had to manage myself as SRO about speed, because some of those things take time, and so we've been deliberately making sure we don't rush at things. We give local areas enough time to build those relationships. The fidelity stuff is although I think when it comes to visit, local areas might feel like they're being tested. Actually, it's supposed to be a part of a continuous improvement frame, so that will be part of the lessons. What am I doing here that could be improved? And then finally, I think it's a bit early on, are we learning things, but where we find an area is struggling with a thing and preferably has found a way through, we definitely we want to share it across the other areas, because that's a key part of the learning process.
Thank you. Chair, that's covered everything.
Thank you. Steve Darling.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. We've heard evidence as a select committee that the Connect to Work scheme is somewhat over-bureaucratic, also that it repeats the same challenges that has appeared on other schemes, and also puts additional strain on local authorities. Or I'd welcome some reflections on how would you respond to those criticisms?
You've got a insight into my daily life, really. So this is definitely one of the ranges of obstacles we've been navigating over the last year. So on the one hand, the supported employment model is very well evidenced. It is clear what the key features of a good supported employment model are, and therefore I'm insisting that those are delivered. And it's not an unfair criticism for local areas to say, but we might have better ideas. But my response to them is, I'm the SRO. We have been funded to deliver this supported employment programme. It has these features. You need to deliver it this way because we think it will work. And that creates a tension, so that's definitely true. Apologies for being a bit throwaway. But yes, it is true also that I work in central government and we are a bit bureaucratic because we ask for the delivery plan, we assess it really thoroughly with experts, and that it was very clunky and unsatisfactory for the early areas who went through.
But do you reflect on how things could be a little bit more streamlined at all, and in delivery and so forth, and allowing a bit more flexibility?
It's fair to say, isn't it, that this is the first time the DWP has done
it this way,
and I think it's been a learning process, it seems to me.
Yeah, so certainly in that assessment process, very clunky early on, we definitely streamlined it, and I've got a table here of how quickly we've been able to approve plans and so on.
I think that's the positive thing that you've just alluded to, that if lessons are being learnt and as it rolls out further, there are opportunities to try and streamline, and those opportunities have been taken, then one can only welcome that. And I think that the funding is quite limited. I think it goes up to 29. But, that, and in the greater scheme of things, that's not very long. How are you able to give any stronger confidence to local authorities about the longevity of these? Because I know from my experience with working with organisations that help deliver these in my constituency that quite often it can take quite a while to get people in the right place. And so, making sure that there is that longevity is just really important, because it's so important that we get people into work because it's so good for people.
But of course we are bound by the fact that we have a spending review period, so that's why the funding is as it is. But the intention is, and I think, Angus, you would say this, that the intention is the 5 years is what we're looking at, but the funding is allocated on a 3-year basis just because that's the way government operates.
Yeah. So I've signed agreements for the full 5 years, even though DWP doesn't have a budget for the final year. I've had strong conversations with my finance director about the wisdom of that, and obviously there are clauses that would enable that to be broken. But yeah, my main ambition is that it works, and therefore it becomes part of the...
and that's why it's so important to have timely evaluation throughout that between now and 29/30.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. So we've had, as I mentioned at the beginning, we went up to Durham. We heard from providers there, and we also have heard from witnesses this morning as well. And some of the comments, and I absolutely accept the points that the panel is making today, but that there's variations in commissioning across areas means that there's a lack of a consistent service model. So I don't know how you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is one of the things I'm really keen for the evaluation to draw out, is what we think, are there any observable differences between the different models? Because it's a feature, not a bug. Mm-hmm. So we allowed local areas to decide how. So some have got a really strong in-house delivery. Some have got, a handful have gone for completely contracted out. Most have some hybrid version of what they're doing themselves and what they're procuring. But that in itself means that it... And then, completely understandably, other areas have done... There is some area-wide provision, but often they've said, well, we are essentially a loose confederation of 4 local authorities, and therefore we have to make sure that this local authority does its own bit in Leicestershire and this one does it in Rutland and this, etc. And my only criteria was, when assessing the delivery plans, do I plausibly think this feels deliverable in the way you're describing and planning to do it? And do I think you've thought through the challenges that might bring, and do you have an answer to that? Because if you do, this is the point, it's about local choices. But you're completely right, we might conclude actually doing it on a micro level in some places where there are very few people was a mistake. You'd have got better economies of scale, for example, if you'd done it at the whole accountable body level. But I didn't want to prejudge that, because actually the opposite accusation is the one I've heard most often in my career. DWP, you're a monolith. Why do you do it at such large scale? Why are you not more responsive to local? So here we are being more responsive to local, but it's not a risk-free enterprise.
But it certainly fits with the direction of the government in terms of devolution and devolving down to local areas to make decisions. And obviously we've got quite a patchwork of devolution at the moment, particularly in England, around where you're devolving to.
No, I accept the sort of tensions in how you're going to do it. We don't seem to have any questions specifically on monitoring and evaluation, and particularly independent monitoring and evaluation. So tell me about that. I'm adding that into my list here.
So yeah, we've got, I think Simon described the NatSen evaluation, so that they are independent, and so they'll be doing their work on the quantitative and quantitative. The fidelity contract I referred to, that's a third-party organisation that will be assessing each individual area against the fidelity score, and then we'll be doing our own, as with any programme, we'll have data that we'll be monitoring performance against inside DWP and having that relationship with each of the local areas about how they're doing.
Maybe if I just pick up the relationship, the local areas with DWP. Traditionally, on the big programs you know about in the past, then it's been quite easy the data comes in, and as an analyst, we look at the data, we can monitor it, and we can publish the data for everyone to be able to see that, and we can do evaluation with here. There's a lot of data sharing agreements that need to be negotiated. There's a lot of work with local areas to work out how to have consistent data feeds, to be able to know we're assured of some good data coming in, so we can understand how many people are going on the programme, the kind of characteristics of these people who are going on you've already heard. It's a broad eligibility group, so we want to be able to capture and understand that profile of people sort of coming on, the kinds of people that come on. We will capture that more richly in our surveys, where there's opportunities to ask lots of questions about people's experiences of Connect to Work, how it's helping them find employment, what are their barriers, what are the challenges for each particular person, whether they find employment or not, so we can learn more. And then even deeper sort of qualitative research to actually have conversations with participants to find out what is going on, because of everyone will have unique circumstances, so the monitoring and evaluation will help us understand the kinds of people go on. And I've already talked about the impact evaluation, the importance of that in the long term, to be able to understand what is the ultimate impact, what is the value for money of Connect to Work when you bring it all together, all that money, all the local areas. And we need to do that, all of that in partnership with local areres.
Thanks, Sam. Has the evaluation framework been published? It'd be really useful to see that.
So the contract it's out in the public domain, so it's well known in that sense. As in terms of the framework, I'd have to get back to you on that. But in terms of the contract,
that's really helpful. Thanks so much. And I'm handing over to Lee Barron.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Referrals to the work and health programme ended prior to Connect to Work being in place, leading to a gap in service provision. And the question basically is why was the transition not better aligned?
We did debate this long and hard, because obviously we knew that the working health programme was due to end. We had already extended it. We knew that was potentially an option. Essentially, it was in the end a choice about financial priorities. So what could we afford to do? But we were definitely cognizant that in some places there would be a gap in provision, precisely for the reason it was the last referrals were in, I want to say November 24.
Yes,
and it's a year-long programme, or a
15,
bit more, 15
months.
Yes. So there will still be some participants even now as a result, but you're right, it would have been better if I'd been able to either to extend that or to mobilise more quickly. There were difficult financial decisions. This was early doors of the new government, basically, so it was part of that first spending review conversation about what was possible and what was the best bit. So
It's right to say as well, isn't it, that the guidance around Connect to Work, the new proposal, went out in November 24, and was it May 25 when the first
the people you were speaking to this morning were the first to go live in April, May 25. So in some places the gap was really quite small, but it has, despite my best efforts, in other places it's been slower to mobilise.
I think if I could just add that the work and health programme had a slightly different eligibility sort of group as well. So Connect to Work is really trying to address the problem of economic inactivity due to illness, sickness, or health conditions, as we've just heard. And it's really trying to do that in a more serious way and with greater reach than really any time we've done before within sort of DWP history. Work and health programme was predominantly for those who were job seekers or those who were on the Universal Credit Intensive Work Search Group. Only a small proportion actually went on the work and health programme. The evidence from the work and health programme was good for that group, as it has been for things like Restart and other programmes. So Connect to Work is this sort of group that really is trying to address the issue around this quite broad group, and to use the very good international evidence on supportive employment to help this group.
I suppose it's not quite your question, but the other thing we did do in order to minimise the gap where this was relevant is we've extended most of there was a thing called local supported employment, which was for people with learning difficulties that run by in some local authorities. We extended those in order to minimise the gap, and we also extended some of that IPS-PC provision again for the same reason, to make sure that was smooth. So the one thing that we didn't in the end extend was the work and health programme, and it's partly because it was a different thing, but it was also because extending it would have come at you can't sort of do it week by week. You have to do it. You have to go in big, and it would have been a large extra cost.
Okay, and ensuring that there's an accurate picture of on the ground readiness for the rollout of Connect to Work. What's being done to ensure that? I mean, you spoke about some of the areas around.
Yeah. So I mean, if I go right back to the beginning, I guess I've always known there was varied capacity between local areas. It's a sort of a reasonably obvious point, and that we therefore set ourselves up with a range of experts and internal teams to be able to work with areas to help them. The really encouraging thing, which didn't feel true when I first took this job on, was that every area was up for it. So in the very early advice I gave to Peter about on the sort of accounting officer perspective, it said there is a risk there'll be some places where there's nothing, because some areas might say no thank you because of the wider pressures on local government, but actually every area has been really enthusiastically engaging. So then it's just been a support thing about how can we help you be ready, and in particular we made an offer on the commercial side, how to think through the best way to let contracts and manage contracts and so on where they're doing that. So we tried to strike that balance of giving them the lead, but then having a really good support offer around them to help them get ready. And then once we've signed the delivery plan, there's then a very, again, they would probably say to me overly managed, but a managed process of implementation readiness and support. And are you actually ready to press the button and say you're live? Because there's essentially a checklist that we have to go through with them about all the things that would need to be in place, like have you recruited the staff, have they got somewhere to sit, have you done the training, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we tried our best to help them be ready.
Thank you. John Milne.
Thank you, Chair. We heard evidence from Sir Charlie Mayfield last week and talked through some of the recommendations in his Keep Britain Working report. And we also heard from representatives of disabled groups and small businesses. And there was people observed a certain tension between the report saying we're facing a crisis, i.e. urgency, yet the report suggests a 7-year implementation period. So where do we sit with that apparent contradiction? This is probably one for the Minister.
So, well, first of all, I think the Keep Britain Working report is a really good piece of work, and I want to just pay tribute to Sir Charlie Mayfield for what he's done. He did it very speedily, I think. And you're right, there is a long period of time. However, what I do know about Sir Charlie is that he is anxious to see results. So, the fact that we're going to have set up I think it's 125 vanguards, we're going to see, and also the other key bit of this is it's employers, it's businesses who are leading on this. It's not government telling them what to do to provide the best possible support for their employees as they go through their working life and might develop health conditions or disabilities. So I think it's positive, it's employers. It's really positive Sir Charlie's leading the charge on this. So whilst there is that long tail, I'm not sure that we're going to be waiting 7 years to see the implementation of the good practice that he is very keen is shared amongst employers. And he's also very conscious about small and medium-sized employers, because they're the ones who often don't have the resources that, John Lewis or Marks and Spencer's or whoever have. So I think that sharing of good practice, looking at what businesses can do themselves, how we develop a better offer between the employer, the NHS and the employee, I think is going to be key to this. But Lorraine, do you want to say something on this as well?
Yes, thank you, Minister. So my team has supported Sir Charlie Mayfield through the development of his report and also the beginnings of the Vanguard programme, which he wants to go live with very soon. So as the Minister says, the pace of this, I think, reflects the wide range of activity that we're looking to explore with the Vanguards and with disabled people's organisations and others with an interest in this work. So the Vanguards are going to look at developing a sort of healthy work life cycle and actually looking at the interventions that work, and perhaps from their experience those things that haven't worked so well, through the whole life cycle from recruitment and onboarding right through to someone perhaps finding that work is compromised a little bit by circumstances in their life or their health. Specifically working to develop a standard so that all organisations of every size and shape and sector can have a really strong sense of codified activity that is good, that represents good work, that keeps people in work. Really building up an evidence base so that government can take that evidence into future spending reviews and decisions that it has to make. So I think that maybe explains the length of the time frame that Sir Charlie is referencing here, because there's a block of activity that is deep policy sprints and workshopping to try and work out what the vanguards are doing. The vanguards actually working together with us. The vanguards providing information, insight and data through a workplace health intelligence unit that we're looking to establish. And the vanguards actually giving us real-time information about how this is working in their organisations. I think it's quite a different way of doing policy, but I think the timeframes represent fast pace in terms of the activity, a longer time frame in terms of influencing government with the results of that.
You see it as with that evidence coming in along the way, as generating actions that will be taken a whole lot sooner than 7 years.
Yes, and I do as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, talking to the businesses, small and micro-sized businesses, in the report there's lots of recommendations, and a number of them would put costs onto business. Unsurprisingly, they weren't terrifically keen on that aspect. Obviously, they're under a lot of pressure in general. Do we think it's reasonable to put extra costs on business and looking at everything else that's happening to them?
Look, I take your point about additional costs on business, but what I also know when I talk to businesses is if they've got an employee who they've invested in, who is doing a good job for them, and then for whatever reason they've got a health issue, a health problem, they might have to have time away from the workplace. Most employers do not want to see that employee go and drop out of the workplace. And so I think there is an acknowledgement that supporting, doing the right thing for that employee and keeping them on the payroll is going to be helpful to that business. I think we're always mindful of additional burdens on business, of course we are, and that's why I think it's really important that employers are leading the way in the vanguards, are the ones who are determining what works, what doesn't work, and we have to have an eye to business as well as how to support the employee. So I take your point, but I think that is factored into the way the vanguards are set up and the evidence that will come back.
Many of the vanguard businesses are large, though, and if you're a business of 5 people, it's a huge impact if one of them requires significant interventions or whatever. How would you respond to that?
Well, I know you're right, there's a lot of large businesses in the vanguards, but there's also, I think, the mayoral and the combined authorities that are working very much with their small businesses in their localities for exactly the reason you've recognised, that if you do lose one person and you're just a group of 5 working together, that can be very difficult. So that's factored in as well. We want to test this for all businesses, not just the large ones. Sorry, Lorraine.
Sorry, Minister, just to say, yes, we have 10 regions that we're working with, and they will bring along with them a whole range of sizes of organisation, including small, medium-sized enterprises and even micro-enterprises as well.
I managed a small business myself in the past, and it can be very difficult to deal with them. Another thing, so we asked them what would you like if you could have it, the businesses in these, what's your first ask, and they pinpointed cutting national insurance contributions for taking on disabled or other abled staff. What are the prospects of that? National insurance is always a popular topic.
Well, you will appreciate that. That's not in my gift as the Minister for Employment.
You could recommend it, push for it, lobby.
I think we keep under review all policy initiatives. We look constantly at what we can do. So, I can't say to you today, I'll give you an answer on that, but all I can say is we review, we look. I have constant discussions with the Minister for Social Security and Disability about what more we can do as a government.
If not that, any other suggestions? That was their top ask.
From employers?
Yes.
Well, I think one of the issues I come across when I talk to employers is about confidence. That's what lots of employers tell me. They don't feel very confident dealing with an employee who's sick or has a disability. So I think that's what I'm hoping we're going to get through the vanguards, that ability for employers, whatever size, to feel confident about what measures they need to take, how to talk to an employee as well. That's often difficult. And I think as members of Parliament, we all employ people as well. And I know it can be very challenging to have a conversation with a member of staff who has a health condition, and you want to do the right thing, but often it's having that confidence. So I think for me, ensuring employers have the confidence to do the right thing, have access to information. I mean, at the moment there is information out there, but I don't think it's very accessible if you're a small business person trying to find out what do I need to do about this employee with this certain condition. I don't think that's great. So access to information. So those are the things I'm thinking about at the moment. But I think the vanguards and the evidence that comes back from them will help us provide a better offer to employers.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve Darling.
Thank you. And I just really wanted to reflect on reasonable adjustments in employers' world there. And it can be one of the barriers of people being able to gain work is not being able to get that reasonable adjustment happening. And it feels as if it can be a bit murky. What is reasonable? Is there any thoughts that you've got of how to give greater guidance to employers around this so they can have greater confidence?
Lorraine, do you want to answer that?
Yes, so we do have an online tool, as the ministers maybe alluded to, that does support employee health journeys, and we hope that more and more employers can have access to that whilst we're developing Keep Britain working through the vanguards and working through all of that. I think we probably see this a little bit with Access to Work. The committee will be familiar with the Access to Work scheme that is really designed to support employers above and beyond the reasonable adjustments that we would expect that they are making. But I think it is quite clear that there is a bit of a muddying around what a reasonable adjustment is that the employer should be paying for and taking on, and where Access to Work might well enhance that further.
And I don't want to stray too much into Access to Work because I know colleague is picking up that, but I just really wanted to explore with you about reasonable adjustments and access to work, because I know that there are fears from those who campaign and work in this sector that there is moves afoot to shift some of what would have been picked up by Access to Work as a reasonable adjustment to many and particularly larger employers. Are you able to reflect on that and whether those fears are reasonable?
Well, there's been a consultation around Access to Work. I don't want to stray too much into that either, if there's going to be another question. And there was a collaboration committee as well that was set up to look at Access to Work. And I think we recognise that there needs to be reform of Access to Work, but I have not been involved in that, so I can't really say anything other than that at the moment.
Particularly focusing on the reasonable adjustment and Access to Work, are you able to shed any light on that at all? Where the culture is heading in that direction, or any thoughts?
Well, I think, as Lorraine says, I think there is confusion about, for employers, what reasonable adjustments means, so I take that. But I think what I'd have to do is probably speak to my colleague, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, who leads on Access to Work, and I'm very happy to write to the committee to respond to your particular question.
That's if you can, just around that interplay between reasonable adjustment and Access to Work, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, and my questions were on Access to Work.
Right.
Obviously, we've seen the National Audit Office report on the Access to Work scheme, which makes clear that demand has doubled. The number of full-time equivalents working on it has more than doubled, On top of that, the department says it's improved the productivity of case managers, but at the same time, the number of reconsiderations has increased substantially, and these are taking longer to process. So why have the number of reconsiderations increased so much?
Sorry, why have the
number of reconsiderations increased so much?
So access to work, I think we all recognise is demand-led, and there's been this huge increase over the last few years. As I was just saying, in the Pathways to Work Green paper, it was set out there was going to be a consultation around access to work and about how we need to change it. And the collaboration committee has met and has completed its work. It's now with ministers to decide what to do next. Your point around reconsiderations, as I understand it, is partly because I think there has been there's been an attempt to try and make sure that policy and guidance is applied in a more consistent way. And that might be when people come forward to have their access to work grant renewed and perhaps are told no, or it has to change, or you're not going to get quite what you had before. It may be because of that, because of the consistency of the guidance now being applied in that consistent way. So it may be that, but I would have to get some information and write to you about that point around reconsiderations. That would just be my kind of initial view about what had happened.
We've also seen, so the official stats show there was a 10% decrease in the number of people who had an access to work support element approved between the financial year end 24 and 25. And there are anecdotal reports of cuts to award values. Can you explain that?
Well, again, my understanding is that may be linked to this policy and guidance being applied more consistently across the piece. That's my, what I'm told is that there's quite a lot of discretion around the way that access to work had been applied by individual caseworkers. The idea was to try and provide that consistency, so it may be that. But I don't know, Lorraine, if you're able to help me with that any further.
I can only say, Minister, I think that it is in that consistency space where the scheme, for example, looking at elements such as support workers, there may have been a slightly lower level of consistency than is being sought right now. But it may be that writing to you, having looked into the reconsiderations and the differences, might be the appropriate thing to do.
I mean, I think we would welcome that, but I mean, just on the consistency point, is it that some employers were using the scheme to fund adjustments that they should perhaps have been funding themselves, or is it concerns about third parties securing disabled people access to funding for support workers and then providing those support workers themselves?
I don't think I can really say, and I think it would be better, sorry, if I wrote to you.
Just one small point, just to fill out on the evidence. We do have some research underway at the moment around journeys on access to work. That's in the field at the moment, and hopefully that will fill out a little bit more around the sort of evidence around how people are going on to access to work. What are people's experiences? So that, I appreciate that would just be a partial answer to the question that you're answering, but I think that would help shed light on some of these issues. That was all.
And obviously, you've said that the consultations happened, etc. When do you think you'll be coming to us with a view on?
So I was talking to the Minister for Social Security and Disability yesterday about this, and he said it will be soon.
Thank you. Lee Barron.
Some of them. Yeah, just turning to the disability confident scheme. We've heard concerns that the scheme lacks independent validation and meaningful accountability. How do you respond to those criticisms?
And I think they are reasonable criticisms, actually. And I think there's already been put in place some reforms to disability confident. which are useful and helpful. But clearly one of the things I was struck by was making sure that the voice of disabled people is in there, and I'm not sure it is at the moment. So one of the aims of the reforms that have been announced so far are to provide that independent evaluation, but also to make sure that the lived experience of disabled people is in there as well. And as I understand it, this year in 26, we will be looking and testing out this to see then what further reforms we might want to make, having tested these initial changes. Lorraine, though.
Yes, so we recognise some of those comments with regard to disability confident, and certainly at the higher tiers of it, at level 2 and level 3, the expectations are higher on employers, and some of the reforms that we've announced and that we're going to be testing this year, as the Minister says, will be around certainly that level 3 being really quite demanding about what employers should do, putting that out for external scrutiny that is much more solid perhaps than we have been, and also making sure that at level 1, where the majority of employers are, that is seen very much as a starting point and a progression point, and that people have perhaps a stronger incentive to move through to level 2 and level 3, where the scrutiny is higher. We also, as the Minister says, want to bring the voice of disabled people through much more strongly in the disability confidence scheme. You know, we have heard that the lived experience does not always match up to the disability confidence claim that an organisation has, so we really are wanting to move the dial on that, and we want to make sure that small and medium-sized enterprises have got a really strong track through disability confidence, so it's applicable for all sizes and shapes of organisation. And then yes, as the Minister said, levels 2 and 3, in particular level 3, external validation is going to be key.
But I think it is valuable. And when I was looking at the figures, 19,000 employers have signed up to this. Yeah. So I think it is good, and I recognise exactly what you say, but I think it's not so, it's something I think we ought to work on making even better. I don't think it should be scrapped, as some people have called for.
No, I don't, and I couldn't agree more in relation to the amount of employers that have signed up. We used to champion a charter protecting workers who've got a terminal illness, because they fall into the disability category once that diagnosis has been given. And also welcome the fact as well that you want to hear from people who this impacts on, because I'll be honest, the department's got a reputation of kind of like not hearing the voice of people that it impacts. And I just think that the more you can do that, actually the better, because that'll see some tangible results. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Damien Egan.
Thank you, Chair. I want to turn to the Work Well programme. So the government have announced national expansion of the Work Well programme. There has been some caution because we don't have the full analysis from the pilots that went out. I'd like to ask about the evidence and the reasoning for the national expansion.
Okay, so perhaps if I say that Work Well is obviously based on information, evidence, analysis that's happened before this type of scheme. When I went to visit Work Well in Cambridge at the end of last year, one of the things that struck me there was they'd taken quite a long time to actually get going. Yeah. And we've got these 15 pilots, and it seemed to me that we were rather ambitious in thinking you could just turn on a scheme and it would be running from day one, and then you'd get all the information and evidence. But I think it's sound, and I think the evidence and information that we have got from the 15 pilots is sound and doesn't stray from what we believed, that this is a programme that can help people get into work or stay in work, addressing their health issue as well as their employment issue. So I think perhaps, Simon, you might want to say something about the evaluation, but I think that's why we decided to carry on and expand it to the whole of England, because the initial evidence is absolutely what we thought it was going to be in terms of providing that support.
Yeah, I can add one or two things. So it's, as the Minister's just said, it's based on some really good evidence in terms of personalised supports for people to support people in work, particularly those with a health condition. I think the new thing is that it's trying to involve the health service, so very much integrated with the health service. So that's quite new, but the actual support itself is well evidenced. So it's about trying to engage more people who might not otherwise be engaged through DWP, traditional kind of services. So I think that's a really, really important point. I think we published first statistics just on the starts coming through. So 25,000 people to date have gone on the scheme. I think this is encouraging, given this is a new kind of way of doing things. In that publication, we showed that there was a really kind of quite a range of people going on the scheme. Nearly half of those people who went on the scheme have got a mental health condition. There are other sort of characteristics showing the kind of the range of people going on the particular scheme. Now we haven't got really any outcomes yet. It's too early. So particularly what we're looking for is some sustained employment going forward. For every programme that we've ever had, it always takes a while because you have to wait for cohorts to go through and see whether they can get some sustained employment. So that's going to take a little while. And it's not only about employment, of course, here. It's about health outcomes. It's about reducing sickness absence. It's about well-being, about mental health improvements. And these are all things that we've got an evaluation plan for. Again, it's sort of quite similar to what I was talking about earlier for Connect to Work. So we've got a really comprehensive, quite big quantitative surveys going to go forward in this year. They'll be in the field this year. And qualitative research to understand the processes, the experiences, the staff who are working with people, the whole referral mechanism, how does that all work, as well as it takes a little bit longer, but more on the kind of employment impacts. They always take a while to see whether there are employment impacts. We've got assumptions as to what they might be based on sort of previous programmes. But what we're really interested in is, can it work? Can this kind of support work in an integrated way within sort of working across health and DWP?
And if I could just add to that, this goes through the ICB, and we all know that ICBs are going through major changes at the moment. So I think to roll work well out at the moment, when the ICBs are reconfiguring and sorting themselves out, it's kind of making sure that it's in there now, because I was worried that if we waited for the ICBs to be reconfigured and for everyone to be sorted out, then that we'd be fitting in, whereas we're in at the beginning here. We're saying Workwell is part of the ICB, this money is available, you need to deliver it. So, Lorraine.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be part of ICB's neighbourhood health plans. The 10-year health plan was really keen to show that shift, and Workwell is absolutely a part of that. Just to add to what the Minister and Simon have said, just getting really strong enthusiasm from ICBs to be a part of this and to look at the next 3 years and say we're going to embed this in our plans and we're going to build our a Workwell service. Really encouraged to see in the early management information that we've published that a strong proportion is coming from GP referrals into this service. The trust with the health service is one of the lessons we're learning is really essential here. So I think we've seen good indications that what we expected from the programme in terms of the mix of people out of work and those in work, the mix of conditions we're seeing coming through, mental health mentioned, also musculoskeletal conditions being quite a feature, and also the range of people and age groups taking part gives us confidence that this is something that the ICBs will want to run with and will want to build into their plans for the next 3 years.
And just a personal reflection, I mean, I worked in the Joint Work and Health Unit 10 years ago. We were excellent at world-class piloting, I mean, really excellent. But then you think, well, come on, there's a big problem here. Why aren't we going? So we could have waited another 3 to 5 years till we were absolutely sure. But the scale of the challenge today means I don't think anyone would accuse DWP ever of being gung-ho on our rollout of support, but I think this time we are balancing. We know enough to know that it's a sensible thing to do, and we should do it everywhere rather than the more traditional wait.
Thank you. Sort of a reassuring answer from across the panel. I think it's important to have the background and that context. Do you, given the timelines for it, do you know when you will start to get that data about the sustained employment aspect for disabled people, and when you'll be in a position to not just publish it, but to publish it and learn from it?
Yeah, so we hope to be building on the MI, the first MI that we published. That will certainly grow as in terms of statistics. We will bring in outcomes over the coming year, I would say. We will have our sort of first interim sort of on the surveys and qualitative evidence later this year. And then that will build into next year, more tracking of cohorts, more sort of quantitative survey. We've got sort of interim reports, so later this year, then into 2027, and then building impact analysis over 2027 and 2028. We also, for the expansion, because we have gone for the expansion, we not only want to look at comparison groups for our impact analysis, but we're also looking at the feasibility of potentially bringing in a randomised control trial for a few areas as well. Just a feasibility, I might add, at the moment, to see, because that will give us even more a robust view of what the impact might be. At the moment, that's just in feasibility at the moment.
Thank you. And a small one, Chair, is just to add, there's been difficulty recruiting and retaining work coaches. So how will you get around that aspect on the work and health coach element of the programme?
Sorry, it's been difficult.
Recruiting and retaining work coaches. Yeah. So I mean, in this broad, I think you're right.
Yes.
Across the broad market, it's one of. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's an answer but to continue to try, because more and more people need our help, and key part of the help is a person helping another person, and so whether it's in the work and health coach, whether it's employment advisors in talking therapies, whether it's the employment advisors that sit as part of the supported employment programme, or whether it's work coaches in job centres, they're both. There is some difference in skill, but there's also a core. And we just want... Similarities. Yeah, it seems to me that we need to continue to invest, train, support them as a community, and not poach between all of that. Yeah.
And also, I'm conscious with the Job Centre Plus that we're wanting to transform job centres. So it's not about, a tick box compliance relationship you have with the customer, but it is about that personalised individual employment support. That's the kind of what we want work coaches to spend their time on, and that's why, we're looking at a digital part of the job centre to deal with some of that compliance part of it. So I think making the job about, as Angus says, the individual, helping the individual, what you can do to support them. And also when I talk to work coaches or those who are working in Workwell or Connect to Work, the people there are really enthused about their ability to assist that individual and support them into work or at work as well. So, and I think it's right that we invest in our training. I think there's probably more we can do there. Yeah.
I think that's right. Whenever we get good examples, it's when people have got a really good relationship with the clients that they're working with. Yeah. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Evidence base as well, clearly.
Just a very quick one from me. Obviously, in terms of the budget and the amount of funding that was identified for employment support, that was constructive. I wondered if you were able to identify what share of that employment support would be specifically for disabled people. If you haven't got that figure now, no worries. We will follow up from today's session. But another point that I wondered if you'd like to comment on when you write back, or if you have a word now, is in terms of the scoring by OBR of employment support, and particularly given the points that we have heard about. We know now what works, and that the investment and return on the investment is significantly more by specific programmes. How can or are you making that argument to the Treasury and or directly to the OBR?
Well, you raised a really important point. Simon, do you want to say, or Angus, do you want to say something about this?
Because then you can colour in some of the detail. I mean, I think we've had some really detailed conversations with the OBR, with the Treasury in the room, really constructive conversations. The first point to say is they are very, very complimentary about the strength of the evidence that we have. And that's real testament, actually, to Simon personally, because he did much of it, that is now the bedrock of our evidence. So that is a real positive. I think what you're partly alluding to is the OBR themselves have been thinking, well, what's the right approach we should take when we're doing things like scoring at fiscal events? And essentially they've changed their threshold. And essentially their feedback to us is we genuinely think this extra investment in Pathways to Work employment support will have an actual quantifiable impact on employment. But there's so much else going on in the system, so you're reforming the job centres at the same time, some programmes have ended, new ones have started, and their job is to look at the macro level. And so essentially what they were saying to us is we don't think it's sensible for us to explicitly in the maths score an impact of this thing because there's so much else going on.
You're saying it's affected by less
so many other
things.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
that's
they certainly said, they said that it would, based on the good evidence base, as Angus sort of said, that it would potentially an additional 20 to 40,000 inactive claimants into work sustained for a number of years. So that doesn't sound that big, but it's actually a really, really big is very significant number. But as Angus said, they decided not to sort of explicitly put that scored view into the things. That was back in sort of November now, so there's quite a lot of uncertainty about allocations. Since then, those allocations are starting to materialise, with more sort of clarity. So there's more assurance about what the department is going to spend sort of money on. And I think I just add on that I think this is in terms of expectations of numbers of people who might be engaged with economically inactive are higher than any time in DWP sort of history. It really is quite a step change, from thousands here, thousands there to much higher numbers than we expect. That's obviously going to take a lot of work, and all the programs we've already talked about this morning, we're all going to have to work very hard to ensure that people are engaged, the systems are all working together. So it's the beginning of a journey.
I know I shared the evidence that the Select Committee commissioned, but that 5% would reach your target. It would and give a nice return to the economy as well. So I'll leave it at there, but thank you so much, Dame Diana Johnson, Minister for Employment, and your excellent team. We've all enjoyed asking these questions. I hope you haven't found it too traumatic, but we're going to finish now.